powerful book and a powerful author that we're talking to here. And he has done some amazing work. The name of the book, Jane's Dust. He has a copy too. Ronald Gordon is with us. He is amazing. A Tale of Deceit and Death. And when we're talking about that, I mean, what automatically goes on and through your mind? We're talking about asbestos. We're talking about talc powder. He is such an expert in this field. I mean, listen, these are cases that he's testified in. This is his CV. When I printed it out, I couldn't believe it. For 50 years, he has worked his magic in so many ways. I want to read you something that you'll see right on the jacket when it comes to his background. So Ronald Gordon is a professor of pathology at an incredible school of medicine, the Icahn School of Medicine. That's, of course, at Mount Sinai. And he has an appointment at the Mount Sinai Hospital. As I said, he's testified in so many cases. He's been studying lung and vascular disease for nearly half a century and is one of the world's most foremost experts, for sure, in electron microscopy. And he is a noted expert in the analysis, as I mentioned at the top, of asbestos and its association with illnesses. And the illnesses we're talking about, mesothelioma, hard for me to pronounce, but very important, lung tumors, fibroids, and ovarian cancer. And we've seen some of the sad tales that's happened. And he's been somebody who's been instrumental in really waving the flag and talking about this and letting people know how serious it is. So Ronald, thank you so much for doing this. I love the fact that we're going to do a deep dive here.
Yes, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So let's talk about the book first. So this book that I'm holding up here, Jane's Dust, what made you decide that you were going to write a novel about what you've seen?
Well, I wanted to get the information out to as many people as possible, and I figured one source or means of doing that would be a book. And this way, these people who have used the talcum powder in the past, especially those who have used it extensively, whether it be for themselves, on children, etc., they need to be aware that they could be exposed to asbestos through the use of this, and therefore they need to be monitored so that they won't go through what this person that was represented in the book had to go through as a result of using this talc because of the asbestos in the talc.
Yeah. When you first, 40 years ago or so, when you first started to look at what you were seeing in the human tissue, were you shocked by some of the reaction and the fact that the companies like J&J really didn't do much about it?
Well, initially we started with, I was involved with the companies that were producing it for commercial use to a large degree. And we knew people were coming up with asbestos-related diseases, which included fibrosis, lung tumors, and mesotheliomas. That was what the initial studies were about, all right? And then other people had been using or studying the talcum powder and talc-containing products for the presence of asbestos, because everybody knew that there were veins of asbestos running through the talc in the mines. And if you go back as far as the 1950s, in 57, 58, Johnson & Johnson, Colgate with Cashmere Bouquet, they knew that the mines that they were getting the talc from, which included the Italian talc in Valcesone, and was contaminated with asbestos. And yet they basically ignored it to a large degree. Then there were then studies which developed into the 70s, and there were numerous documented studies where 3 labs had found asbestos in the talcum powders as well. One of those people actually worked here at Mount Sinai in the environmental department. And he's the one that actually taught me how to do this type of analysis to determine if there's talc and asbestos together. Now, what you have to understand is that the talc itself is not 100% safe alone. Talc alone in enough quantity causes granulomas in the lung. And you get what's called a restrictive type disease from that. Johnson & Johnson keeps saying it's 100% safe. It isn't 100% safe, even without the asbestos. And then the issue with asbestos is something called latency, meaning the time you're exposed to the time the diseases start to appear. People who work with a lot of this material, the asbestos-containing material, it will develop generally between 10 and 40 years following the exposure. Now, a lot of these people continue to work with it. We are now seeing people who worked with it in the 60s still coming up with mesotheliomas and lung tumors that didn't smoke, and they're still coming up with these diseases even beyond 40, but these are people that had less of an exposure, very similar to the situation that we see with the people who have used talcum powder, where the talcum powder, it's only a contaminant in there. It's not been added. It's not, and there isn't that much of it in there. So it takes a long time for these diseases to develop. That's why it's important that I'm trying to get the message out to these women and men that have used this product or have worked with products containing talc, like sheetrock, spackle, that kind of stuff, to be monitored medically, because this may just appear in their in their older ages.
Wow. And of course, as you said, that's the key, is the latency, that all of a sudden it shows up, and that's the danger. You think you're fine, you have no idea, hey, there's only a little bit of it. But even obviously in what you're saying and all these analyses that you've done, even a little bit is too much, right?
Correct. Yes. Wow. I mean, if with the commercial type asbestos, which is crucidolite and amosite, they were suggesting that if in high use occupations, insulators, stuff like that, even 1 week working with the material was enough of an exposure to cause either these tumors or fibrotic lung disease.
Yeah. And so for you, obviously you've testified in so many of these cases. I mean, isn't it, it's like over 300. What's that experience been like, and why is that the other important aspect of it?
Well, the 300 cases are related to the talc alone. I've been involved in doing analyses of patients' lungs and other organs, including ovaries and uteri and other things, to find the asbestos in them. And when we come back with positive findings, it correlates exactly with their exposure history, which is the use of this material. All right. And not only that, but you think about it as the use with, say, talcum powder, but a lot of women and men, for that matter, in some instances, who use like in the movie industry, where they put makeup on your face and stuff like that. Most of those bases are talc bases. So they too have contamination in them. And now you're sitting there for hours brushing out of a container, you're brushing it on your face as a base to get the coloring right. All right. And there are other components and that are important with regard to the exposure history, eyeliner, and of course men, use it as well. So in similar fashions and different fashions, as even just being in a bathroom, for instance, and shaking the container onto your feet is enough to get this stuff up into the air that you're going to breathe.
Wow. So what can people do? I mean, what do you do? Just really check the ingredients and make sure that there's nothing in there?
Well, they don't report the ingredients. That's the important. That's
Right.
that's the issue. They'll say it's talc based, or in actuality, Johnson and Johnson knew in the 70s that it was contaminated with asbestos. They tried to remove it and they couldn't get it all out. So their answer is they developed the cornstarch type of powder, all right, which they started to sell around 1980 to avoid this. And my assumption was, because I don't know specifically, but I thought that they would ultimately move to that as opposed to the talcum powder, but that never happened.
Wow. And so you continue to testify. You write Jane's Dust. Tell us about Jane and how you molded the character after all of the things that you've seen, the organ damages that you've seen, and so much in your career.
Right. Well, Jane basically represents these 300 people that I've looked at to a large degree. And in fact, she mimics one of the cases that was actually presented on the CNN documentary. And what happened is here's a woman that was maybe in her early 60s, and all of a sudden she develops an ovarian cancer. She didn't know she had anything. So, and then they find out, and they assumed it was unrelated to anything. They couldn't determine it. So she went through chemotherapy and surgery, removed it, and she apparently was fine at that point. But 2 or 3 years later, she now starts to have a problem breathing. And she goes to the pulmonologist or her doctor first, and then gets referred to the pulmonologist. The pulmonologist looks at her and says, and then they do some testing and they find out that she's got a mesothelioma. The doctor starts asking her if she's ever used asbestos, because mesotheliomas are typically related to asbestos exposure. So what ended up happening was they were going to call it an idiopathic mesothelioma. But then Jane is sitting with her husband and watching TV, and they see a TV ad from the lawyers, and they said, well, maybe our mesothelioma may be related to something like this. Let's go talk to an attorney. So they go to the attorney and explain their medical history. And sure enough, he's the one that tells them that that's how the exposure occurred and why she's sick. In both cases, both the ovarian cancer and with the mesothelioma.
Yeah. Wow. How sad does this make you as somebody who's seeing this again and again? It has to be frustrating. It's wonderful, actually, that you've written this book because you're trying to get the word out any way you can. So weaving this tale will help people understand how this can happen, especially to women, but like you said, men too, as well, because the powder is so prevalent. It's in locker rooms all over the place. People throw it underneath their arms. They, as you said, in enclosed bathrooms, not even thinking anything about it.
Right. And the longer you stay in the bathroom or or any enclosed space and breathe that, the more asbestos you're gonna breathe, because the talc drops out of the air faster than the actual asbestos does. So the longer you're in the bathroom or in the enclosed area, the more you're going to be exposed.
Yeah. I mean, this seems pretty obvious, and we've talked about it right from the very start. What do you think ultimately the solution is? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see the talc off the,
Out.
but Johnson and Johnson, well, Colgate with the Cashmere Bouquet, it no longer exists. That's been for years, actually, now. But the other cosmetic companies still sell talcum-based powders, Gina Tay I mean, I don't know all of the Revlon
Sure.
and all the other suppliers still sell this, including Johnson and Johnson, who claim they took it off. They were going to take it off the shelves when their supplies ran out. But now we're finding out that they're importing it from a subsidiary, and it's back on the shelves. Now, I haven't done any testing on that specific talc, but it is talc anyway. And I think the source of that talc is China. They stopped using the talc from Vermont, and that talc contained a very potent what was termed anthophyllite type asbestos, because it had a high iron content, which is what contributes to genetic mutation in this through the iron oxidation pathway, all right, from a chemical standpoint.
Right.
And so they stopped using that mine there. And now they're using a Chinese source, which is also contaminated. Wow. As far as I know.
Wow. What do you hope people take away from this conversation? What do you want people to take away from this?
I want them to, if they know they've used this material, you know, the talcum powder or talc or cosmetics that contain talc for years, I want them to see a doctor. I want them to be followed up and explain to the doctor that they've used this, and it's been suggested that they actually be monitored for gynecologic tumors if they've used it inguinally, or if they used it on their faces or on the rest of their bodies, and they were able to and they breathed it in the bathroom or any other place. And this way, if they do develop a tumor, it will be caught early and they can be treated very quickly and easily, as opposed to a situation where if it's later on, there's a potential issue of never recovering.
Yeah. Keep doing what you're doing. Again, the book, Jane's Dust. Well, look at there. You have a copy too. Where's your copy?
Here's my copy. Yep.
Right there. You look at it, A Tale of a tale of deceit and death. There's no question. There's so many of those tales out there. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and thank you so much. You can get this book right here. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Get this book, give it to your friends, give it to them for presents. Let people know what's happening out there. Keep doing, like I said, what you do. Ronald Gordon, thank you so much.
And you can also get it on my website, which is drronaldegordon.com.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.